The way this is going to go, just a little bit of housekeeping, is that I'm going to talk and discuss the 4 wines that Grove Street Brokers would like us to do. I'm going to run through a few slides and some videos, but please feel free to send Michael, who is sitting with me. He's my partner over on the East Coast. He's sitting in Delaware. And if you can just drop any questions into the chat box. I think many of you are Zoom savvy these days. If you've got any questions, just pop them into the chat box, and Michael has the authority to interrupt me as we go. So my name is Nick Goldschmidt. I am a winemaker from California. I am originally from New Zealand. I trained in Australia. I lived in South America in the late 80s, early 90s, but came to California full-time in 1990. And I was the winemaker at Senior Winery. At that time, I was owned by a little handbag company called Louis Vuitton, you may have heard of. And we were sold to Constellation in 1999. And I stayed on at Senior until 2003. At that point, I changed jobs and went to the world's largest wine company called Allied Domecq. Brands that you would know would be Clos du Bois, William Hill, Atlas Peak, Gary Farrell Mum, Buena Vista, Campo Viejo, Marcus Dierens. Anyway, they owned 58 wineries in 7 countries. So I lived on an airplane for a number of years until 2008. And we were sold back to Constellation, so I got my job back. And so in 2008, I went out on my own, and that's where we are today. So today, I make wines here in California. I also make wines in New Zealand, Argentina, and I consult for 26 other wineries in 5 other countries as well. And we own vineyards in 3 countries. And I'm also an inventor. But today, we're just going to be talking about the Goldschmidt wines and some of the wines that you can buy through or are made available through Grove Street Brokers. So just shooting up to the start here. All right. So a little bit about where we are right now. We're sitting in Healdsburg, which is in the heart of wine country, which is also where Grove Street Brokers are. So Grove Street, if I was to walk to Grove Street Brokers, it would take me about 10 minutes, maybe a little longer in this heat that we're having at the moment. What's really cool about working with Grove Street is that they really provide small, hard-to-find wines, not only from mid-size family businesses to very small family businesses as well. So they're a real treat to work with. And it's a great relationship for me too, because it allows me to sort of experiment with other wines as well. And if you're interested in those wines, again, get a hold of Grove Street, and we have some really small lots, 50 cases or 100 case maximums on some of those as well. And these are little growers that I work with around the county. Really cool things coming up. And for you guys as consumers, it's a really great company to work with too, because basically you get your own broker, somebody that you can discuss wines with, and somebody who's on the lookout for you and can really make wines or find wines that suit your palate over time. So it's a great relationship, and I really love working with Grove Street Brokers. This is for those, we're sipping in place or sheltering in place. This is I have 5 children, as you'll see, but these are the 2 that have been sheltering in place with us. This is my senior in high school holding her prom dress because she was not allowed to go to prom. She wasn't able to graduate. Well, we did the drive-through graduation, of course, like everybody else. And then my son, who they shut Reno down, he's at UNR, and so unfortunately he is working at home as well, although now they're on break. But I've had plenty of things to do. I've been doing a lot of work around the house and obviously still drinking wine, and that's my wife who's with me as well, who runs Goldschmidt Vineyards. The 4 wines we're going to discuss today are the Trig Point Signpost Chardonnay. So I'm going to talk, there's a couple of things I'm going to focus on, and one of those things is going to be the nuances of what makes this Chardonnay unique over others, and it's really to do with mass selections and clones. We'll talk about Fidelity Railyard Zinfandel, which is a vineyard that we actually own. Stonemason Hill, which is Katherine Goldschmidt Cabernet. And then Hilary, which is the one wine that we'll do from over in Oakville. So the 4 wines. So we're going to spread over 3 appellations, 2 of them from the Alexander Valley, 1 from the Russian River, and 1 from Napa. So just real quickly, I'm not going to bore you guys too much, but I want to make sure you know what a Trig is. So this is what a trig looks like. So my father was a land surveyor, and so this wine that we make called Trig Point is sort of a retrospect of what he did. And so a trig is a point of reference. My brother and I used to climb the top of these hills with wood and build these trigs. And at the bottom of the trig, we'd hang a plumb bob, you know, a big piece of lead, and it would hang over the grass. And where it fell, we would punch a steel pipe into the ground, and that became the point of reference. And from that one point of reference, you can create boundary lines, and so the trig is a point of reference. And so hopefully that's what that means in relation to the wine as well. For those who don't remember, this is a tangent, and this is a diameter, and this is the sort of stuff that we had to deal with when we were kids. And what's really cool about a trig is you can actually, with 2 points, you can actually measure distance, in this case a river, by just having these 2 points. I'm not going to bore you because I am a mathematician and scientist, but that's where they came from. But my father was he was on the 4th expedition to the Antarctic, and of course in those days they still don't have any wood, so they used to build these trigs, they're called cairns, out of stone. That's Mount Erebus in the background, and this is in 1958. And that was my father in 1958, and this is my father 2 years ago, still using a similar theodolite. Obviously they use prisms now, and of course now they're using even GPS, but that's what a theodolite is. Right, looking at the wines. So right now I'm sitting where this blue dot is. Grove Street Brokers would be just down here a little bit, and that's where I live, which is the other red dot. So we come up Healdsburg Avenue here, and we take a right, and we drive on back through this beautiful little valley, and we come to what's the Trig Point set of wines, or the Trig Point Vineyard. The Chardonnay that we're going to be discussing comes from right out here by the river. The name of the wine is called Signpost, and this is an old stump of a tree, and it used to have Foppiano, Passalacqua, Sagacio, and Mazzoni on it, but today those signs have fallen off, and because they want to protect the innocent, I guess, and so they've got numbers up on the tree now. But the whole property used to all be Passalacqua at some point, but the Sagacios, the Mazzoni, the Foppianos, they're all married into the Passalacquas, and so that's why the property is all broken up. But it's a beautiful valley, as you'll see. Under the Trig Point label, we actually make 4 wines. 3 of them are red, but today we're just going to be discussing the Chardonnay. And this is the whole vineyard. So that road that I showed comes in over here on this side. This is the Cabernet that we'll be looking at a little bit later. The Merlot, but not under the Trig Point label. This is the Merlot from down here in the Chardonnay. And what's really funny about this vineyard is that this area here is in the Alexander Valley, and this area here is in the Russian River. So this is not the river. You'll see another photo in a minute that points out the river. But when they drew the Appalachian lines, they drew the Appalachian line right through this property, which makes it really cool. So the key element for me is this mass selection and the old vine. So we often talk about old vine Zinfandel, and sometimes we talk about old vine Cabernet, but in this instance, we're also talking about old vine Chardonnay, and I'll explain that why in a second here. The other thing that we do, the other really important thing, is that we use native yeast. So we don't add any inoculated Saccharomyces or Bioannis. We just use what comes in on the vineyard, and we do very limited malolactic, which we can talk about a little bit later as well. This is an aerial shot of the actual Chardonnay, and you can see this is the Russian River. That little creek that you saw last time is this one here. So that's where the Chardonnay is in the Russian River. And you can see in this photo, there's a few missing vines because the vineyard is so old. So let's talk about mass selections and clones and why this wine is unique. So pre-Prohibition, everybody would the old Italians, when they came here, they would randomly plant varieties. They'd have Zinfandel, Mourvedre, and Carignan, and Petit Syrah all planted in the same property. And this is where these field blends, if you like, came from, or the name field blend. In 1933, in late 1920s, we had Prohibition. And after Prohibition in 1933, a lot of people were chomping at the bit, and they started to want to come out and look at the varietals. And so by 1960, vineyards were started to be planted separately. Zinfandel was planted separately to Cabernet, to Petit, to Merlot, etc. And some wineries a little bit earlier than others still actually have a bottle of 1934 Fidelity Alexander Valley Cabernet. And you may recall Goldie Vineyards over in Napa and Inglenook over in Napa. So there was sort of 5 wineries back in the 30s that came out with varietals at that point, but it wasn't really until the 60s did the varietal explosion really come around. Now, back in those days, I'm going to come off sharing my screen here because I'm going to explain a little bit about what this means. And you can shove me on speaker view so you don't have Michael looking at you. So what happened was, in the early days, we didn't have, when you wanted to buy a plant or something like that, you couldn't just go down to the nursery and buy a plant. What we'd have to do is we would grow them ourselves. And today, when you buy a plant, there's two parts to the plant. There's the rootstock, which is at the bottom, and then there's the scion, which is at the top. So if you were to look at a plant, this is what we call the rootstock, and this is the scion. I thought it was pretty funny. They've named a car a scion. I didn't get it, but anyway, whatever. So we could plant a vineyard, and obviously we're talking about Chardonnay this instance, and we didn't have nurseries. So as I said, we do it ourselves. So we plant the rootstock, and in this rootstock, if we were to blow this up, pretend this is a plant, we would cut a little T in the bark, and we'd peel the bark back, and then we get the bud. So we'd have the stick of the Chardonnay that we wanted. We get a knife, and we cut the bud out. We'd peel back the bark, we slip the bud in, we tape it up, and we could grow Chardonnay. Very easy to do. I know I would put apples on the pear tree, peaches on the nectarine tree, oranges on the other tree, whatever. My mum would come in and go, Christ, what's going on out there? I know you guys in the US are all watching television, but this is what we did to entertain ourselves in New Zealand. So anyway, we could do all this, and we'd plant vineyards like this. And then one day, a winemaker came out and said, you know what? This vine, this vine, this vine, and this vine, they taste different to all the others. They're a little bit more tropical. And so what we did was we would select the budwood just from these 4 vines, and we would plant this. And we would call it, let's say it was high-end tropical, so we'd call it pineapple-y. And then we could select, 3 other vines, and this became pineapple-y squared. Okay, everything was really cool until 1989, 1990. And the rootstock that we were using was called AXR1. We suddenly found out that the French who had sold us AXR1 had lied, because there's 2 forms of vinifera. There's the vinifera that you know, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, and everything. That's called Vitis vinifera. And the rootstock is supposed to be Vitis labrasca, but it wasn't. Somebody had blended in some Vitis vinifera into this rootstock. So when we did these things called mass selections or field selections, when we put them on top, and we took that and put it on top of the rootstock, these things were related. So there was really good compatibility, and we didn't know that. So with the demise of AXR1, we suddenly had to start using labrasca. And so when we used these new rootstocks, and we took what's called these field selections or mass selections, and we put them on top, guess what happened? We got virus. We got leaf roll, stem pitting, corky bark, leaf roll 1, leaf roll 2. We got all these viruses. And so what happened was some of the vines died, but more importantly, we got low yields. And of course, commercially, that's not very viable. So this is where cloning came around. So starting in 1989, 1990, they started really pushing clones. And the way they discovered these clones was because they wanted to have good compatibility with these new rootstocks. They went into the vineyard and they found one vine. For some reason, this one vine didn't show any virus. And that became clone 1. And the other way to do it was they would take a leaf, and this is how I got into grape growing, was you take a leaf and you slit the veins on the leaf and you put it on an agar plate and you grow the vine, you take the tip, you grow the vine, you take the tip, you grow the vine. And what you're doing is you're outgrowing the virus, you put it on the new rootstock, voila, clone 2. Very interesting. Because what happened was, by removing all the virus, we actually took away all the flavor. And that's why today, when you go and drink Chardonnay, it all tastes the same. If I hear another Chardonnay, when you pick up a glass of Chardonnay, of course, I'm a drink ahead of you guys, I've already started. So I'm drinking the Trig Point Chardonnay. I'm drinking the 2018. I know you got 17. I'm a drink ahead of you. I've got the 18. If I hear another Chardonnay described as white peach or Granny Smith, all the Chardonnay tastes the same. And that's why I never wanted to make a Chardonnay, even though I'd been making Chardonnay for years and years with Simi and Clos d'Ivoire and Franciscan and Wild Horse and all these other brands you've heard about. The Chardonnay, the interesting vineyards were disappearing. And so I never wanted to make another Chardonnay until I discovered this vineyard. So let's jump over and have a look at it. So the key thing about these mass selections was they were smaller berries, they were smaller yield, but they had this huge diversity in flavor, and that's really what we're interested about. The clones, though, were selected for larger yields and faster accumulator of sugar, so they ripened quicker. They were like the giants of the vineyard, because they grew big canopies and big crop, and they accumulated sugar, because we don't want to run into November with Chardonnay because, of course, you know, we get inclement weather, we might get rain or whatever, and so they wanted to defend against that.
Picking Chardonnay out here in the Russian River today. The guys are sorting through it. Beautiful old vineyard. We're just wrapping up here and should get this fruit into the vineyard at the winery in the next hour or so. It'll be fantastic. This is some of the best Chardonnay that we make, and you can see we've got big berries and small berries going in the same cluster, and this is what mass selection Chardonnay is all about. It's beautiful, beautiful fruit. Little melon and subtropical characters will come from this. Fantastic. No clones here, no clones.
I should actually have a photo of a clone of Chardonnay and a mass selection of Chardonnay so you can see it. This harvest I will do that, but if you were to look at a clone of Chardonnay, those berries would all be the same size and very tight. So the other thing that people often talk about is malolactic. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because people often ask me how much ML is in your wine, because they want to discuss what they perceive to be as a buttery character. But there is so many things. I can give you a wine that's got no malolactic in it. It's had no bacteria, because malolactic is a bacterial ferment, and yet it tastes buttery. And I can give you a wine that's 100% malolactic, and it does not taste buttery. So unless you understand some of the science, it's not a really interesting conversation. But our wines, the Trig Point 2017 that you're drinking, does have a little bit of ML in it. So it goes for about 3 months, but I would say it's about 20% if you want to look at it like that. But more importantly, let's talk about style. So these mass selections that we used to have were all up here in the pineapple-y melon end of the spectrum, and we had names for these people. This was called Spring Mountain, Rude, C, S-E-E, which is what we're going to talk about here. Then we have what we now describe as these usual Chardonnay stone fruit, pip fruit. This is where the clones, the clonal Chardonnays come. And then we had Badeau and Mount Eden and Calera down here, which were grassy. So these were the names of the mass selections, but this is the style descriptors that I use. The other two terms we use are structure and texture. So when you drink a Chardonnay, it comes in the mouth like this. That's a structural wine. Things that make a wine structural or tight are the temperature you serve the wine at, the acidity, the CO2, the carbon dioxide, and things that make a wine textural or come in the mouth broad and finish broad. It's pH, alcohol, fruit, malolactic. Those things are trying to make the wine fatter. So it's a difference between structure and texture, and those are the two terms as winemakers that we use. Now let's throw the Trig Point Chardonnay on here, the Signpost. So for me, stylistically, I get a little bit more structure because I like the mineral character and I like the gunflinty. I'm more of a Burgundian drinker because I like the lower alcohol. I don't like the fake sweetness. And then ripeness-wise, we get into this melon characters because this is the SEE. One of the other wines that I've just left with Grove Street too is this wine. It's called Singing Tree Reserve. This is a single vineyard, Dutton Ranch. For those who know Dutton, it's a very famous vineyard out in Green Valley, which is a very cold place of the valley, believe it or not. I picked the Dutton Chardonnay after half of my Cabernet. That's how cold this vineyard is. But you're going to get even more subtropical and a little bit more texture because of the way I do it. So stylistically, for me, these are the three main styles of Chardonnay that you're going to find in California. But these last two styles are only going to be found on vineyards that were planted pre-1989, because these other vineyards are too young, and when they were young, these younger vineyards have all been planted clonally. All right, you ready for some red? Right, so this is Fidelity is the first wine that we're going to talk about. So we make two Fidelities. Michael, jump in if there's any questions. We make two Fidelities. This is the first, we're only pouring the Zinfandel today, but we also make a Bordeaux blend that Grove Street can get for you, which is a blend of Cabernet and Merlot. That makes up about 85%. And the other 15% is made up of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. So people who drink red blends and don't ask what they're drinking, normally are drinking Syrah or what are some of the other varietals that people don't like? Well, they don't like Merlot in a lot of cases too. So don't think that all the Syrah and Merlot vineyards were ripped out. They all went into red blends. But if it's a Bordeaux blend, it means that we can use the Bordeaux varietals. There's a fifth varietal called Malbec, which I don't have in the blend here. Now, the name Fidelity was really, it's a bit of a sad story. So the name came from a friend of mine who in 2000, he was a grape grower, and I'd been buying grapes from him for years, but he had decided to make wine himself, and he built a winery, and subsequently he sold the winery and a contract for the grapes for 3 years. He called me up and said, Nick, I'm going bankrupt. Can you help me out? I said, well, yeah, I'll come up and I'll taste all the wine. So I tasted I think it was the 01, 2, and 3 vintages that were all in tank. And so I said, well, man, these are great. You know, the blend, the red blend like we're talking about today. So we pumped all the 01, the 02, and the 03 into separate tanks. And then I called up a buddy of mine who happened to be the buyer for a little retail store you might have heard called Walmart or Sam's Club. And he agreed to take the wine over 3 years. We launched it on Valentine's Day. We called it Fidelity. We put a little heart on the label. And everything went really well for 2 years. And after 2 years, he called me back and go, Nick, I can't sell the last 500 cases. I'm like, dude, I'm still working for CME. I can't come out of the closet yet and do what and sell the wine. So I called up 3 of my distributors immediately that I knew, and they all agreed to take the wine and help me out. And you wouldn't believe it. The next day, 92 points Best Buy Wine Enthusiast, and they called me back and said, hey, dude, can I get my wine back? I'm like, no, I've already sold it. So today, we keep the name the same, but on the label, you'll notice there's a broken heart. And this is a screw you to Sam's Club, Walmart, Costco, and all the other big companies that are ruining the small independent retailers and the small independent wineries. So you will not find this wine anywhere except in real specialty stores or, of course, at Grove Street brokers. So that's the story on Fidelity. Now, the 2 wines come from 2 different vineyards, and we're just going to focus on the Zinfandel right now. So heading north out of Healdsburg, this is me again, you head north on 101, and we get into this little town called Geyserville. And just north of the town, for those who have been in Geyserville, this is the Geyserville town itself. This is a little hotel called the Hoffman House or the Geyserville Inn. And believe it or not, this vineyard here is one that we own, and half it's planted as Zinfandel, and the other half's planted to Petit Syrah. That's the Russian River down there, if you want a point of reference. So the key, Zinfandel is it's simple or complicated depending on which way you want to make it. And I'm going to make it a little bit complicated for you. So this vineyard was planted as a head prune vineyard, which is the way most of the Zinfandel was planted. It was planted on St. George, which is, I don't want to get into the rootstock on St. George, but it's a really vigorous, deep, old rootstock that all the Italians used to use. They never used for Zinfandel and Petit Syrah. A lot of these vineyards did not use AXR1. And so a lot of them were still on this old St. George. And then we came along and we wanted to commercialize it a little bit more, and we wanted to get a little bit more exposure onto Zinfandel. So we put some wires up you'll see it on a video I'm going to show you of the vineyard. We put some wires up, and that sort of trained the Zinfandel up a little bit. So it's a very old, classic style plantation of Zinfandel. The mass selection that again, it's not a clone. This is a really old mass selection. We don't know where this mass selection came from. The original guy that I bought the vineyard off, Praddy was his last name, and had been in their family for about 90 years, all the way through Prohibition. And so he didn't know where the plant material came from either. It's a beautiful little east-facing slope, which is really important because the sun comes up in the east and sets in the west. So I prefer morning sun to afternoon sun, especially with Zinfandel, because we get more raisoning with Zinfandel. So any exposure on Zinfandel, and you can get too much dehydration. And I'm not a big fan of that. The other thing is it has really good water holding capacity, because with St. George rootstock, it's very deep rootstock, and so we want to have that water be a long way down. So we want to have some really good soil that can hold some water for a little bit longer, not like Cabernet where we usually want thinner soils, or Merlot where we want a little bit of clay. The other thing that I do is I want to pick a little bit earlier, because I'm not a big fan of high alcohol in Zinfandel, and the reason being is I really like to drink 2 glasses of anything rather than 1 glass and falling over. So I don't want to be drinking 15 alcohol Zins. So we try to get a little bit lower. And then Zinfandel has really, the skins on Zinfandel are quite different to Merlot or Cabernet. Cabernet skins are very thick and firm. Merlot are somewhere in between, but Zinfandel are really friable. So we want to be very gentle when we extract Zinfandel, because we can get too many bits and pieces.
What a beautiful day to be checking out Fidelity Zinfandel. That's Geyser Peak, and down towards the sun, which I'm not going to bore you with, is Mount St. Helena. We're at the Railyard Vineyard, named for 2 reasons. It's named for, there's 2 railway lines at the back of the property here as I walk gently east, or down this east-facing slope. And the second reason is it's the name of a very famous rugby stadium that was imploded in Wellington, which is the capital of New Zealand. Of course, the World Cup is going on in Japan right now. So let's just check out some Zin. We don't have too much dehydration going on yet, which is cool, but we've got nice, even color. This could be one of the best Zinfandel vintages that I've seen in a long time. These vines are relatively old. They're planted on St. George, which is the original rootstock that was used for Zinfandel in the early years, and this is an old mass selection, field selection, so not a clone. It was grafted on by the previous owner of this vineyard, and what a wine it makes. Just really intense Zinfandel. For those who've tried the Fidelity Zinfandel, you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, beautiful day here, Railyard Zin Fidelity.
So that was the 2009.
Hey, Nick, just a second. So talk about why you want to avoid dehydration so much. Why is that so important ultimately to somebody that's buying a wine?
Yeah, the key thing about dehydration on Zinfandel is that when we have too much raisoning, it's very hard to predict what the alcohol is going to be. So, because when you have a raisin and you put it in a tank of wine, or even if you put it in a liquid solution, over 24 hours, that raisin gets bigger and it sucks up the water that you'd put in to dilute it, and the sugar actually increases. So when you typically crush, Zinfandel is the only variety that, well, other varieties do it, but this is the worst, or the biggest problem with Zinfandel is this unpredictability of sugar. So when you harvest a cluster of Zinfandel and you put it in a tank and you measure it and it's 24 bricks, you come back the next morning and it's 24.5 bricks, the sugar goes up because the raisins are actually now releasing the sugar. And so it's very hard to do. So we want to try and avoid too much raising of Zinfandel. That cluster that I showed you, excuse me, had very little raisin on it, and that would be what I'm looking for. Maybe I'll take another couple of berries of raisins, but basically I do not want to have these huge, I've seen clusters that are 100% raisins. It's just really hard to make wine when it's like that. The other thing too is when sugar decreases during the fermentation, so the yeast are fermenting sugar to alcohol, the alcohol starts to increase, if you can imagine. So it's two different lines, right? As the alcohol increases, the alcohol is actually poisonous for the yeast. And so the yeast start to die. As the alcohol gets higher and higher, the yeast population decreases. And when that happens, the fermentation sometimes stop because the yeast just run out of energy, run out of steam, because there's too much poison. The alcohol is poisonous to them, and they die. And there's two forms of sugar in grapes, glucose and fructose. And glucose is very easy to ferment. That's what the yeast ferment first. But to ferment the fructose is very difficult to do. And if you have high alcohol and the yeast stop fermenting, you end up with fructose left in the ferment. And fructose, as you know with Coca-Cola, it's a very sweet sugar. It's much sweeter than glucose. So you end up with high alcohol and a lot of sugar. And that's why I'm not a big fan of a lot of these Zinfandels. So and I'm drinking Zin right now, and I'm going to have 2 glasses because I'm not afraid of this one. Anyway, so that's the way I like to make my Zin. So I'm drinking the Fidelity Zin, as I held up earlier, and I've got the 2018. And yeah, hopefully that answers that question, Michael. Oops, sorry. So this is what you're trying right now. This wine just got a 92 in the Wine Spectator, and it's been commonly this wine just gets Best Buys everywhere. So it really goes up against, a lot of famous neighbors around the place when it comes to Zinfandel land, but we're able, because we own this vineyard, and we've owned this vineyard for a long time, we're able to give it to you at a pretty decent price. So yeah, look out for that. For those who are not Zinfandel fans, this is maybe a wine that you may want to try, because it still has the Zinfandel essence, the spice and the cola and a lot of red cherry, but you can drink it and it's juicy, because the thing about wine is this is fruit. We don't want to be drinking alcohol and acid and malolactic and all this other stuff. We want to be drinking fruit. And so that's the key element that I try to get, especially in Zinfandel. All right, we're going to jump into a couple of wines that I make with my children. And today we're going to be talking about Katherine and Hilary. These are the last 2 wines. They are both Cabernets. Chelsea's our oldest daughter. She is 28 now, and we started making wine with her back in 2002. And the label comes from when she was 2 years old. I traced around her head, and then she colored it in. And that's where the label comes from. And then we copied that for the other 2 daughters. You'll notice that Katherine faces a different direction to the other 2, because she's the middle child. And we all know what middle children are like. They're the penultimate salesmen, the liars, the manipulators, the think outside the box. They challenge their parents all the time. But man, she's got me wrapped around her finger. Anyway, so she faces the other direction because she thinks way outside the box and always comes out of left field, and that's what we love about her. So we're going to be talking about Katherine first, and then we'll jump over into Hilary. So these are my 5 kids. This is actually in the Chelsea vineyard. This is Chelsea, this is Hilary, and this is Katherine. The Cabernets that we make are either from Oakville or Alexander Valley. So from Oakville, we make these guys, Game Ranch and Hilary are the 2 most common. And I believe it or not, I left out Forefathers, which is, sorry. So Forefathers is my really cool little Cabernet, and then Katherine. And so this is what we do in the Alexander Valley. So where the vineyards are is, if we head, for those who know, again, where Geyserville is, we're heading north and then to the east. And Katherine is this little, it's a valley. It's actually made up of 5 vineyards. It used to be originally owned by 2 people, but now it's owned by 5. And we buy fruit from all 5. My top vineyard, the Yoeman, sits right above the Katherine vineyard. And in the fires that we had in 2019, actually, this shed got burnt. Vineyards don't burn, by the way. That's another topic for another whole conversation. So the key thing about the Cabernet is that for Katherine, it faces, it's a gentle slope. So it's the middle of the slope, the Piedmont piece. I don't like being on top of the hill, because top of the hill, the soils tend to be really thin. And I don't like being down right by the river for Cabernet, because the soils are too heavy and they'll get too vigorous. I also, again, like east facing, which is what this is, and also being a mass selection, it has low yield. Over in the winery, we don't destem or crush. We just, we destem it, sorry. We destem it, we'll take the rachis off, and then we go straight to tank. We don't actually split the berry, we don't crush the berries. Again, we use native yeast, and we don't add any additions. I will mention that all of our wines are vegan for those who are interested. And all of our vineyards that we own are registered sustainable. Napa Valley does not have sustainability yet, but Sonoma County, we think that by the end of 2011, 95% of all the vineyards in Sonoma County be registered sustainable. And if you want to know what that is, you can go to the Sonoma County Wineries website. I am also in the process of, I'm not a big organic fan. I could talk all day about organics, which is my second degrees in organics, but our big new vineyard Staircase, which we're replanting right now, will be going in as organic. So the big deal for me is this bloom to harvest time frame, which I'm just going to jump off here in a second and talk about. And I'm going to talk about elegant, powerful, dense winemaking. So let's jump into this video. And you'll see that on the vineyard that we have these big green vines here. They look like that because they have more canopy than crop. So this vineyard is actually undercropped. So it produces a lot of leaves and a lot of shoots, but so we get a completely different ripening curve. Here, and that's what I call the dense wine. This is what we call the powerful wine. This is where the fruit and the canopy are in the right balance. And then this piece here is what we call the elegant wine, where the crop is too heavy for the canopy. This is all in the same site, all in the same vineyard, but you can see it's a very complex site. And this is sort of typical to what we get in California. As we zoom in here, you'll notice that's our suburban, which no longer exists. So for those of you who would like to help little Hilary out with her schooling, because she still has to pay for this car that she wrote off, the insurance. So we'll talk about Hilary a little bit later. But that's a look at that vineyard. So I'm going to jump off here.
Nick, can you just stop for a second? We had a question about case production for these wines.
So the Trig Point Chardonnay that I showed you, we only make about 500 cases. It's very limited production. So if you know what a barrel looks like, so a barrel of wine holds 20 just like 24.74 cases, to be accurate. So 4 barrels is 100 cases. So this is 20 barrels, basically, is that wine there. The second wine that we poured for you is the Zinfandel. We make 1,500 cases of this, so it's a little bit more production on that. And so it's still not very big when it comes to Zinfandel, because we don't make enough of it. And as a result, we only sell it in about 5 markets. And then a little bit of direct that we do through Grove Street. The Katherine Cabernet that we're talking about now is this is our big seller. So we do about 10,000 cases of this. So you can find this in restaurants. Quite hard to find it in retail. So it's not something you can just show up into a retail store and get. The best way to do it is obviously to get it direct through Grove Street. That way you can guarantee you're going to get it. And then Hilary, which we'll show in the end, is also only 500 cases. And so very limited production on that as well. All right, so I just want to show you, I'm going to give you a little bit of, how much time we've got? We've got like 15 minutes. Okay, so I'm just going to be pretty quick here. But when we harvest grapes, what we look at is this thing called time. And this is flowering, and this is harvest. And acidity does this. And at this point in time, this is what we call veraison. This is when the berries change color. If it's a Chardonnay, they become translucent. If it's Cabernet, they become red. So we get an increase in Brix. And Brix is the way we measure sugar, which converts to alcohol. And then flavor starts off low and increases as we get closer to harvest. And tannins move from green to dusty to dry to ripe. And where these 3 things meet in Bordeaux is 100 days. Okay, in California, in the Alexander Valley, we can hit 145 days from bloom to harvest. In Napa Valley, we hit 135 days, because remember, Napa Valley is warmer than the Alexander Valley. So this is why I live in California. We get an extra month of hang time. So it's really unique. Okay, the other thing about this vineyard is you notice that there was a lot of different soils. And so if you took an aerial view of that vineyard, you'll notice that there's these different soils in the vineyard. And what I didn't understand was this area here, where the canopy was really big, ripened grapes completely differently to here. So this is what we call the dense piece. This is what we call the elegant piece. And if we look here, what we found was that when I'd go into this vineyard, I would go out there and the tannins would go green, dry, dusty, dry, raisin. They never went ripe. And that's because when you have a big, vigorous vine, it's taking water from the soil. And when the water from the soil disappears, they take water from the cluster. And they do it very quickly because that canopy is so big. And so that's when I learned about being right on top of this and picking a little bit earlier. And so that's the way we think about it when we pick these big canopy wines. The elegant wines are completely different. That's where we know that the elegant wines are always going to be more fruity than they are tannic. So I can leave the elegant wines out there longer. And so my definition, when I put these wines together, there's three sorts of wines. And you think about this when you drink wines. This is your tongue. These are the elegant wines. They're the soft berry fruit wines right up on top of the tongue. The powerful wines provide the flesh and the richness in the tongue. And then the dense wines provide the structure and the finish. And so when I bring these things into the winery, I ferment them completely differently. So if this is a tank, in the bottom of the tank, we've got the seeds, we've got the cap, and then we've got the wine, right? And then we pump over, pulse air, punch down, whatever we choose to do. Because the most important part of the ferment is where the skins are hanging in the juice, because this is where the yeast are hanging out. There's a lot of food there, there's a lot of sugar, there's a lot of warmth. And so when we extract, when we put an elegant vineyard into this tank, we can extract the heck out of it because we know there's more fruit in there than tannin. So it's always going to be fruity. So we ferment, I hate to use Celsius, but the rest of the world has moved on. If you want to convert, you just add 15 and double. So we ferment at 30 Celsius, we give lots of oxygen, we give lots of pump over, and then after the fermentation's finished, we allow the temperature to cool down. And so what we're doing is we're holding the tannins. That's for an elegant vineyard. For a dense vineyard though, we ferment colder, we ferment at like 22 Celsius, less air, less pump over time. And then after fermentation, we warm the temperature up to 20, 28 degrees Celsius. Okay, why do we do that? Well, the reason being is as wines age, and you can look at the wine, you know, I'm drinking, I've got the Katherine Cabernet in my glass now, actually. You can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but when I look down on this, there's two things I look at. I look at the hue, I look at the rim. I look at the color of the rim. So I'm looking for purple and red, usually purple when I'm talking about a younger wine. And when I'm looking down at the hue or the middle of the color, I'm looking for a little bit more red. So you know how wines move purple to red to brown to orange as they get older? Our wines only go purple to red. They will not go brown or orange unless they're about 50 years old. And I know that because I've been making wine from the same vineyard now for 30 years. And I know that even we opened a bottle of 1998 the other day, and it was still red. The other thing that happens as wines move from red to brown to orange, sometimes you get that crusty stuff on the side of the bottle. This is not a good thing. Unless it's the year you got married, the year of your birth, the year of your child getting born or whatever, or some other significant time in your life, get rid of it or drink it. Because that is polymeric pigment falling out. That's color, and that's what I'm doing. I'm removing the unstable tannins or this stuff while it's still on the skins, rather than allowing it to happen in the bottle. So that's really important to me because I want.
We have one question for you, Nick. Why do you put sulfites in wines, and can you tell the difference with wines with sulfites?
So sulfites are naturally occurring, well, it's really, there's sulfides, sulfates, sulfites. Okay, hydrogen sulfide is, I don't think that's what you're asking. That's H2S, that's the reduction character that you often get in some wines. The sulfur, which is what we add to wine, is the preservative. Now, any dried fruit that you eat, dried apricots or raisins or anything like that, the level of sulfur is like way off the chart. Nothing compared with wine. Yeast, whenever you eat anything that's got yeast or drink anything that's got yeast, you're already drinking sulfur. Yeast produce sulfur to protect themselves against bad yeast. No, it sounds crazy. So Saccharomyces and Bioanus yeast, which is what we use, or is natural in the atmosphere or in the vineyard, produce SO2 on their own. And they produce that to kill bad yeast all around them. What we do in the wine industry is we also add a little bit of SO2. Now, what I do is quite different to a lot of traditionalists, especially with Chardonnay. There's two forms of SO2. There's the free form and the bound form. Confusing, I know. The free form is the one that protects the wine. The bound form protects it against bacteria and yeast and all that bad yeast. But if you add too much SO2, you get bitterness. I don't like bitterness. So with Chardonnay, what we do is I leave it with no SO2. So if you look at my Chardonnay today, you'd be petrified about what it looks like because it looks brown. That's because I'm making that wine really, really stable. And then we're going to add SO2 about 2 months before we bottle. And the color will change immediately back. But the key thing is I don't have to add very much. But because the wine is brown now, it is very stable and has protected itself against oxygen. So when you drink Trig Point Chardonnay, in fact, we had a bottle of the 2002 last night, 2002, so 8 years old. That wine is in pristine condition, no browning at all, and very, very low SO2, because that wine was naturally protected during the early stages of its life. With red wine, of course, we typically add even later. Because the thing about red wine is we can protect it by using more rackings, and because we put it in barrel, we can keep it under our control for a lot longer period of time. So when we release the wine again, I add a little bit more SO2 just before we bottle it, just to give it a little protection while we're bottling, because bottling is a pretty harsh treatment. So yeah, a lot of wine, all wines have SO2. Some have more than others. So I don't want to belittle my friends, but people who make wine in larger containers generally have higher SO2. Wines that are in 750s. So probably if you pay a higher price for a bottle of wine, you're probably going to have less SO2, put it that way. But some winemakers still use a lot of it, and I don't.
Could you define for them the difference between good yeast and bad yeast? What does that mean exactly?
So good yeast is Saccharomyces, which you guys all know, and Bioanus, which you may or may not know. But bad yeast would be like Brettanomyces, which is in a lot of French wines. Again, I don't want to generalize, or a lot of some bad California wines have Brettanomyces. And for me, that yeast produces this barnyardy, wet dog, wet horse character, which I'm not a big fan of. So I try to stay away from that. But the other thing is too, we had bad bacteria, Lactobacillus, Leuconostoc, Eniococcus, Pediococcus. These are bacteria that when you drink sherries or ports, typically those bacteria are used in those processes and sort of add a lot of characteristic. But when it comes to still wine, no, we don't want to be to deal with that sort of thing. Okay. Let's jump back in.
Sounds good.
Let's jump back into the blending. Sorry. The vineyard again is old. The location is fantastic. It's an old mass selection. I've been making wines here for a number of years, and we pick it 3 ways, as I said.
Nick Goldschmidt here. I am in the Katherine Alexander Valley vineyard. sometimes I pinch myself that I'm still making wine here after all this time. But really unique. I don't know if you can see in here. No, you can't. Up here, perhaps. So these clusters are super loose. We get nice, even ripening throughout. Just a beautiful vineyard. As you can see behind me, we're a couple of days away from harvest. The leaves are looking, you know, they're right there in terms of their water, and what keeps them in that condition obviously is the beautiful gravelly loam soil that we have here and the age of the vine. And I've been working on this vineyard since 1990. Amazing that I'm still making Katherine after all this time. Obviously the first vintages went to Simi Winery, and we didn't start making Katherine until 2003, I think it was. Anyway, today is the release of the 2018. Just starting to ship 18, and this is the 19 still on the vine. Still our most popular wine, Katherine, Goldschmidt, Alexander Valley Cabernet. G'day, Nick Goldschmidt here. I'm sitting here with 3 glasses of wine, and everything we do is single vineyard, and the way we get complexity out of a single vineyard is by choosing blocks and styles, or working the wines to the way the vines best exemplify themselves. So when I was young, I walked into a room once at a pretty well-known winery with 200 wines on the table. I'm wondering, how am I going to blend 200 wines? I came from New Zealand, I didn't know anything about Cabernet, and so working with a consultant, we figured out the best way to do this is to put them into families. Elegant wines, which are the soft berry fruit wines right up on front of the tongue, the powerful wines which provide the fleshiness and the richness, and the dense wines which give us structure and power. So when we go ahead and line all those wines up, I sorted all the elegant wines together, and I chose the best elegant wines and made a blend. I got the best powerful wines and made a blend, the best dense wines and made a blend, and we had 3 wines, all from the same vineyard, all from maybe in the same block or not the same block, but all from the same vineyard. And then we made a blend of these 3 wines, and it was the most complex wine that we could possibly make. So today I continue that process. With elegant wines, we can extract them a little bit more aggressively because we know that the tannins are in lower concentration than the fruit, so we can extract more tannin. Whereas on a dense wine, if we made wine like that, they become too dry and too tannic, so we lower the extraction and try and make the wines more fruit forward. So if I was to drink an elegant wine, I'm going to get more red cherry, great structure, very forward in the mouth, very, very elegant, very ripe, but good acidity, red fruit, and very forward in the mouth. The powerful wine, I can immediately get it. It's more black cherry, a little bit of walnut, and the mouth is really rich, really full, powerful. Not a lot going on in the front of the mouth, not a lot going on in the structural part of the mouth either. And then the dense wines, much more chocolate, a lot more black cherry, but all finished, very supple tannins, good structure, good acidity. And so when we put the 3 together, hopefully, and it's never 30-30-30, because in a warm vintage, I probably want a little bit more of the dense component, whereas in a cool vintage, I want more of the elegant component. So it really depends on the vintage. And when I put all 3 together, we get the most complex wine we possibly can from the same vineyard. And that's how we make single vineyard wines really complex.
And this wine just got 92 points. It normally retails at about 25 bucks, something like that. But this is that's the wine that you're trying right now. 2018 Stonemason Hill Katherine Goldschmidt. All right, real quickly, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Just where we are with Hilary. This is Highway 29 in the Napa Valley. That would be north. We're going up to Rutherford. This is Oakville. This winery here is Mondavi. That's Nickel and Nickel. That's Opus. And this is Hilary. So you can see we're right in the heart, Highway 29.
Right there is the beautiful Nickel Winery and their vineyard. And that's Hilary down there at that end. And there's Opus, beautiful Opus, out here in the Oakville, getting ready to pick Hilary tomorrow. Cabernet Sauvignon, Oakville, Napa Valley. Another beautiful day out here in the Hilary Cabernet Vineyard. Very old vineyard, as you all know. And we are September 15. And we've got nice, even ripe berries. And we're just waiting for maturity at this point, but the clusters are relatively small, as we know this year, but we've got good color and it's nice and even, and we've got good speckled light. And we know that this is an old trellis system that was developed years ago. This is in what we call a GDC, a Geneva double curtain, and what it produces is very small berries, small clusters with great intensity, and that's what the Hilary Cabernet is known for. One thing that we do with Hilary, of course, is that we do pick it at a little lower sugar because I want to have alcohols that are closer to 14, which is very unusual for Oakville, as many of you know, and that way I don't have to add any acid and I don't have to add any water to lower the sugar, and a beautifully balanced wine is what I seek with very little intervention. Anyway, beautiful day here. I'm going to go sampling and we'll see what we get. Cheers from the Hilary Goldschmidt 2016 vintage.
So this is the key thing about Hilary is that, again, the vineyard is really old, and you could see that there's not many Cabernet vineyards that are that age in Napa Valley anymore. Most of them, as I said, were replanted in 1989, 1990. We do pick a little bit earlier. This wine just got 93 points. There is no Oakville Cabernet. It was interesting. I just read an article that the average bottle price for Napa Valley is $88, $89. And yet we're selling Oakville for around about $60. So this is the best value Oakville that you'll get. And obviously unfortunately, as I said, it doesn't produce that much. So one of the best ways to get a hold of it is through, obviously, Grove Street brokers. So they can get any wine that you want. But 93 points, best value from Oakville. The next best value Oakville Cabernet on the market would be Mondavi, and that's at $75. So this is a tremendous bargain.
90 is there.
That's 10.
90.
Oh, there. Oh, sorry.
I like that little shot there of Hilary, because that's exactly what last-born children are all about. They will argue with you because they want to be precise. And when I blend with Katherine, when I blend with Chelsea, because she's a firstborn like I am, so everything is perfect. The mouth is perfect. It's seamless. When you drink Chelsea Goldschmidt Merlot, it's the sweetest, roundest, most perfect Merlot you can imagine. Blending with Katherine, there's one part of the vineyard which I described as being a little bit more dense. She always wants to add a little bit more density. So when you drink Katherine, you'll get that clean line, and then you get that little kick at the end. And that tannin you feel is Katherine. She put that in there. With Hilary, when I work with Hilary, she wants a little bit of everything. And it tends to end up in the same sort of package as what Chelsea does, but working with her is completely different. And she will argue about how we put wines together. So anyway, just wrapping up, Cabernet is mainly what we do, but today we also showed you a Chardonnay and a little Zinfandel. Everything is vintage variety, vineyard, and vegan. Everything's 100%. These are real stories with real people, real places. You can come out and see them. These are not negotiant brands. And I've been working in the Alexander Valley and Oakville since 1990. And we have some very famous neighbors who charge a little bit more than us. And if you want to come out and visit us, this is where our tasting room is. We're out in Dry Creek. And it's called the Pour House, which just pretty much sums us up. The Pour House 707, which is our phone area code. And as far as, I had a slide here for some other contacts, but these are my contacts. And as I said, I'll send the YouTube link to Grove Street Brokers. So if you want to watch this video again at any time, you'd be more than welcome. And obviously, if you want to get a hold of Grove Street Brokers, this is their phone number, their 800 number. And if you want to get a hold of me, this is my cell phone number. So I want to thank you guys for your attention. I really appreciate you joining with me today. And any other questions, Michael?
Actually, I had a question, or just something for you to clarify. It's not a big deal. You didn't really explore thoroughly why all the vineyards got replanted in 1989. You want to talk a little bit about that, and organic matter in vineyards?
Yeah, that was why, what I was trying, I expect everybody to just absorb this. Everything was planted in 1989, 1990 from mass selections, 2 clones, because the AXR1 rootstock was destroyed by phylloxera. I didn't mention phylloxera. Phylloxera is a little insect that ate all the Vitis vinifera, and because AXR1 had Vitis vinifera in it, that's what happened. Oh, Michael, I've got a quick little poll here. So I'm going to launch this poll here. If you guys want to do that.
Hang on, right before the poll.
Yeah.
We got a question. We have a question of about wildfires and how they don't affect vineyards, or do they?
Well, while you're answering the poll, I can quickly answer that. So wildfires don't really affect vineyards that much during harvest. So we, the fires that we had in 17 and 19 both occurred near harvest time. Not a problem. Vineyards don't burn, and the smoke taint is irrelevant because this is the big reason. At that point in time, during harvest, leaves are starting to wilt. They don't transpire much anymore, so they're not absorbing from the atmosphere. So there's not a lot of smoke taken up. But if we get fires during veraison, remember I showed you what veraison was. If you get fires during veraison, when the leaves are really photosynthetic, energizing, etc., yes, you will get smoke absorbed into the grapes. And that's what happened in Lake County in 2018 and 16, and Mendocino County in 2018. So yeah, when you have fires during veraison, not a good thing. You do get smoke taint. And the way you pick smoke taint is when you smell a wine. You remember when you were kids, and you thought it was really cool, and you smoked menthol cigarettes? That's what it tastes like. It doesn't smell smoky or taste smoky. It tastes like the menthol in the cigarette. You know, you smoke the cigarette, and that taste that you get in the end of your mouth, that's smoke taint. That's the best way I can say to describe it. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the most popular wine tonight was, wow, look at that. So the most popular wine tonight was Hilary, and they got 73% of the vote, and then Fidelity Zin, 60%. Normally, Katherine cleans up. You guys are an odd audience. That's cool, though. I like that. And then I'm surprised that some people actually knew what a Trig was. So 47% of the people actually knew what a Trig was, 53 did not. But I think that's really cool. So we'll end the polling there. But thanks for your feedback, and I'll be sure to tell my team here that we should make more Hilary from now on. Anyway, I want to thank Michael for participating with me. He's on the East Coast, so it's fairly late at night. You're probably going to go to bed now, Michael. And I also want to thank the opportunity to work with Grove Street Brokers and what tremendous partners they are, and certainly for those who are seeking hard to find wines from small family wineries. Grove Street Brokers they're the guys, man. You got to go to them. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. And
thank you, everybody.
And a great rest of the week. Cheers.